Welcome to Witch Hunt. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
I'm Sarah Jack. Today we're speaking with Charlotte Meredith, who's leading a campaign to secure pardons for over 3,000 people convicted under British witchcraft legislation between 1542 and 1735.
Charlotte is working to acknowledge one of history's great miscarriages of justice. Her campaign, Justice for Witches, gathered over 13,000 signatures on a UK government petition.
We met Charlotte at the Witchcraft and Human Rights Conference in Lancaster, England this fall, where advocates from around the world gathered to discuss both historical witch trials and the ongoing persecution of people accused of witchcraft today.
In this episode, Charlotte explains how witch trials differed across Britain, reveals why Scotland executed 5 times more supposed witches than England, and discusses why these historical pardons matter in today's world.
She also connects the history of witch trials to modern-day persecution and shares powerful insights about justice, recognition, and healing historical wounds.
Let's welcome Charlotte Meredith to Witch Hunt.
Welcome to Witch Hunt, Charlotte Meredith. We met at the Witchcraft and Human Rights Conference in Lancaster, England this fall, and quickly knew our work had a lot in common. Tell us about what you do.
Well, thanks ever so much for inviting me. It's lovely to speak to you again. It's even better to meet you in person, of course. So what I do, I have my day job. I work in the publishing industry. I am a writer, but I'm also a campaigner, and it's for this reason you're talking to me. Specifically, I am campaigning for justice for witches. That's the name of my campaign. And what I'm trying to do is to get a pardon or pardons for all of the people who were convicted under unjust witchcraft legislation in Britain between 1542 and 1735. That's in a nutshell the mission.
Thank you so much. It's so lovely to have you here today. And we really love what you're doing. We're completely behind exonerations and pardons. But what are your motivations for supporting pardons now?
Yeah, a good question. It's an important question. And if I say spoiler alert, there were no witches, right? And I shouldn't really have to say that in 2024, but that's part of the reason I'm paying pardon. It's because you quite often find nowadays many people still say, "Oh, no smoke without fire" when it comes to talking about the British witch trial. So they don't get that we hanged on their innocent people. Some people actually think, "Oh, well, maybe these were actually committing crime, were actually witches." And I want to make sure that we stop saying this nonsense. They were innocent people. They were the victims of a gross miscarriage of justice. And we need to be reclaiming the narrative, change how we talk about the victims of our country, and that are now often ridiculed in a lot of ways or dismissed. What happened to them doesn't really matter. And it does matter for many reasons, which I'm sure we'll come back to. But yeah, that's what we're trying to do. I really got interested in pardoning side of things in my writing. I wrote a book which came out last year about the most infamous trial in England, and that was the 1612 Pendle witch trial, or the Lancaster witch trial, where 10 people were executed as witches. I think 9 and one was there in prison for a year. And when I started to do research, the more I did, the more I just felt so sorry for these people and so passionate. I just really wanted to tell their story in a way that hadn't been done before. A lot of what I'd read in the past, there was authors had let the reader decide whether they were actually guilty or not. And I thought, I don't understand that at all. Of course they weren't guilty. And that I wanted to write a book that demonstrated why that obviously wasn't the case. That's where I really started. From there, I was invited to talk about my book and about the Bible for Endel Witches at the Witches Revival, which was an event held in Lancaster, next to Lancaster Castle last year. And I met some people there who were really keen on the idea of finding witches, which I put forward. And so they banded together to help me to start with a petition to the government to do so.
Can you tell us a little bit about the witch trials? How many people were convicted, and what were the typical charges and evidence used against them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's probably important to define what I mean by a witch. Start with. So I'm definitely not talking about people who were martyrs for a pre-Christian religion. I don't hold with that concept at all. What I'm talking about is innocent people who were prosecuted in secular court, and they were people who were prosecuted for very specific crime, and the crime was maleficence. And that was the idea that you were using demonic magic to cause harm. And that was usually either to an individual or to an individual's good. It's quite often people were found themselves in court charged with using charms to bewitch a cow, things like that. So it was people's possessions and goods that was the typical charge. Quite often people found themselves accused of murder. So it may have been, typically it was of murdering a neighbour, someone who could have died maybe 20 years before. They could then 20 years later find themselves accused. And it was also, people had a fear that people were using maleficence to harm children as well. So those are the most typical crimes that people found themselves actually in court for. It's interesting when you look at the first Witchcraft Act in 1542, which was started in the reign of King Henry VIII. When you break that down, what he was interested in, we don't know for sure why he thought it necessary, first of all, to start a Witchcraft Act. But it's quite amusing. He seems to have had the idea that people were using magic to find lost goods and treasure. And that was seems to be really on his mind, as though people were using magic, whatever that means, magical means, to find treasure. And I know there was some theories that some people used to bury their treasure, anything of value. I say, I suppose you've got, if you've got 17th century metal detector going out using magic to find lost goods. And I think King Henry was most peeved that people might be running up gold that should be in his book. So that's quite an amusing bit of the witch trial. That was the priority on King Henry's mind. But that's not the type of reason that people found themselves in court. But that was something you could be accused of under the Witchcraft Act. But it was this idea of maleficence which got you in court. What the problems were for us, there was absolutely no evidence that a crime had taken place. How do you prove that someone had used demonic magic to cause harm or to attempt to cause harm? And that's why I always say that's the main reason why the witch trials were conducted.
What kind of evidence would they have used? We know in the American colonies, there was the concept of spectral evidence that was used at sometimes and not at other times, but led to a lot of trouble in Salem. Was that a factor in UK witch trials?
Yeah, sure. I just actually asked you before as well how many people we were talking about. So we were talking about 3,000 in total that we have on record. So that's people convicted for witchcraft. So we have 2,500 known in Scotland, and we have around 500 in England, and around 8 in Wales. And of those people, yeah, that's the type of thing they were accused of. So when we were looking at evidence, spectral evidence was a factor. Interestingly, when magistrates were looking how to prosecute, they didn't always know what to do exactly, how exactly to go about proving witchcraft had taken place. So if you look at the Witchcraft Act, there's not really much in there in terms of guidance for what they should be looking for. And so magistrates had a couple of choices, and that was to look at demonological literature, to see what the inquisitors, demonologists had been saying about what was they classed as evidence of witchcraft. so they could do that. And another thing which was really influential in England and Scotland was the book Demonology, written by King James VI, Scotland and first of England. That was written in around 1597, or was published then, by King James himself. That's written in the form of a dialogue between somebody who doesn't believe at all in the reality of witchcraft and someone who's going to convince them why they're wrong. And how he did that was he came up with what he calls sufficient proof of witchcraft. So this was evidence that could be used in a court of law to prove that witchcraft takes place. And with King James, he came up with nothing original, really. Again, he took from the previous demonological literature, so things like the infamous Malleus Maleficarum. And he was big on the idea of familiar spirit. So that was the idea that proving that an alleged witch had been involved with some kind of being, demonic being, in the form of an animal, maybe a person. So if that could be proved, then that was the sign that they were a witch and obviously guilty of the crime. That was one thing. Another thing, because King James realized that this issue that not really having any physical proof of the crime was the sticking point when it came to actually convicting witches. Another thing he said judges and magistrates could take into account when prosecuting witches was they could hear the testimony of witnesses who wouldn't usually be allowed to give evidence because they weren't deemed credible or in any other case. And that came down to people who were already convicted criminals, ne'er-do-wells, and also children. Children weren't allowed to give testimony because it was at the time decided in the 17th century that they weren't able to reason. For that reason, they weren't seen as credible witnesses. However, because there were no real credible witnesses at the time when it came to proving witchcraft, King James gave permission for children to be used as witnesses in court. And I know that factor played into the Salem witch trial. So that really had an influence there. So what happened eventually was, so you've got magistrates who were keen on prosecuting witches, going ahead with this sufficient proof. And then King James himself got involved with looking at some of the trials and some of the testimony. And he even interviewed some of the people who were witnesses in court. And he often interviewed people who, the ne'er-do-wells, the former criminals, and the children. And he often found that the children had been lying. Surprise, surprise. There was, for example, in 1634, a case in Pendle again, where a young boy named Edwin Robinson, he actually came home late one night and had a curious excuse for that to tell to his father. And that was that he'd been taken by witches to a local Sabbath. That accusation led to the rounding up of around 22 people. Now, when the boy was actually interviewed, whilst these people were awaiting trial by King Charles this time, it was found that he was lying. And so it became very clear that these sufficient proof were total nonsense. And part of this is the reason why witch trials stopped. Because it became impossible to prosecute a witch, essentially, because there was no evidence. Ghost isn't evidence, is it? It's just saying I saw somebody in a dream commit a crime, commit an act of witchcraft. That isn't physical proof that the crime had happened. So eventually, the people involved in prosecuting witches or alleged witches did start to see there was no justification for prosecuting witches because there was no evidence that a crime had taken place. It was a total nonsense. It was an impossible crime. But that's what happened, really. But it took, fortunately, many, many years for that to happen. But by 1735, Parliament were actually willing to change the law, repeal the Witchcraft Act for this very reason, acknowledging that witchcraft wasn't a reality, and that instead it was a fraudulent crime.
So your campaign is covering more than one country. How did the trials look different across those countries?
Sure. So punishment was different in terms of how you dispose of the body, if you like. So in England and Wales, the punishment was to be hanged. And up in Scotland, the convicted witch was garroted and then their body was burned. And I've heard quite a few theories as to why that happened in Scotland. And some people see it as the garroting or strangulation as an act of mercy. But recently I heard a historian say he thought it was more of a practical reason behind that. Because in his theory, he thought that people were concerned that somebody might be able to escape from the burning fire, themselves be on fire, and be a fire hazard. They could set fire to the building. I think that's actually probably quite a good theory as to why they strangled the person before putting them on the fire. Because why would you be merciful? It doesn't really make sense, does it? There's nothing merciful about telling somebody is a witch.
Continuing in that vein, why do you think there were so many more executions in Scotland than in England and especially Wales with only 8?
Yeah, there's some theories about Wales. I'm going to have to remember, of course, I don't have all the records. So you can be sure that there were more than we know of. But I know some people like Professor Roland Button think that he posed a theory that in Wales, people were more likely to blame fairies for things that went wrong, or any form of adversity, rather than witches. And I've also heard Welsh people use the theory that language may have played a part in it. So I don't know if there was like a specific translation of witch exactly in Wales. So I think that could be it. And that you get that same theory being found higher up in the North Scotland as well. But why it all went a bit crazy in Scotland is because of King James. And what happened was he obviously believed in witchcraft, and he specifically believed in what we call the elaborated theory of witchcraft. So that was the theory that came over from continental Europe, which was that a newly formed, female-led, satanic, devil-worshipping bunch of women were out to kill king and prisoner. He believed in that, and that really wasn't a popular theory in England or Scotland at the time, but he popularised that more in Scotland around 1590s when his wife from Denmark came over with that theory. And before she came over, ship was stopped by various tempests, and the theory was put out by King James that it had been witches who had stopped her coming over and were trying to kill her and him. So it was for that reason there'd be this awful storm that people started being rounded up into Scotland. The lights all went a little bit crazy. They were doing so like under King's will, if you like. In England, until like Civil War time, so around 1640, the continental idea that elaborated theory of witchcraft wasn't particularly popular. The idea was that the witch was working with demons or demonic beings or the devil, but not necessarily that they made a pact with the devil, which was part of the elaborate theory. So there was a little bit more of a reluctance to fall for everything in England. And also you have to look at the court system was slightly different too. I think you had just a slightly different system. We had the assizes in England. And so where if somebody was accused of Lancaster, for example, they would go and await a trial at the Lancaster Castle at the assizes. It works slightly different in Scotland. So you've got more localized courts, if you like. And I think it was a little bit There's been less work for the magistrates to cross Scotland.
We visit this topic week after week, but digging into the details like this, again, it's just such a reminder of this enormous injustice that happened and continues to happen. Legal action can be taken to clear the names of those accused of witchcraft in the UK.
Yeah, fortunately, I would love for all of the people to be exonerated, to do similar to what you lovely people have done and exonerated the innocent people in Connecticut. Fortunately, that's probably not going to happen here. That would have to go through the courts. And to go through the courts, you've got to come up with the new evidence of why the crime never took place, which is in itself a nonsense, right? Because you trying to tell me, or prove to me that a crime took place in the first place. So, yeah, unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to clear the names that way, as far as I'm aware at this point, although things do change. So, the next best thing is to get a posthumous pardon. And we can do that to serve as a formal acknowledgement of the gross miscarriage of justice that took place. That's what I'm trying to do. We can clear their names as much as possible today by doing that. And probably for that to happen, when I've spoken with people involved with the government decision making, and we'll probably likely have to have one law pardon for witches, convicted witches, to cover England and Wales, and another to cover Scotland, because there were different witches actually that what we'll achieve soon. I don't know how quickly soon will go. But yes, so that's that plan. And that's what I'm going to be reaching out to policymakers to help me to do starting early next year.
I'm so glad that you've brought up the Witchcraft Acts, because it's just, we don't have that type of aspect when we're looking at the American colony timeline of witch hunts. So it's really adds great perspective to that contrast.
Yeah, there's so many points that you've made that I've wanted to jump right in on. And one thing that you said that made sense to me, and pardon me for backtracking a moment here. I just wanted to, you were talking about why there were more prosecutions in Scotland. And part of it was this theory that there's basically this grand conspiracy to take down both the state and the state's religion. And that reminded me of in Massachusetts during the Salem witch trials, the minister Cotton Mather really put forward the theory that the devil was coming after Massachusetts through the witches to do just that, to bring down, they wanted to pull down Christ's church in New England and establish the devil's church in its place. So they really had this kind of existential fear that their very way of life was going to be utterly destroyed.
You can take it to like the Malleus Maleficarum, that type of demonological text. Heinrich Kramer was a big fan of that theory. It took quite a few years for that theory to come together into the final version of this satanic pact, satanic group of devil worshippers who were set on destroying Christendom. But yet it's really the crazy nonsense in those demonological texts that then got printed, and the idea did get out eventually. So it just helped to build hysteria. It's strange because but Christianity goes through phases, and then the medieval era, it was very much good versus evil. So any day now, the devil could come and knock on the door, and people were genuinely fearful of the devil. And I always think that one of the part of the reason why the witch trials ended, I think it's because of Christianity, and specifically that good versus evil version of Christianity. I think it started to lose its grip for the population, and the people became less fearful of the devil, even started to question whether the devil was real. And I think find it all very interesting, but it's such a dangerous idea, this belief in demons that can cause you harm, um, and the harm that belief causes.
Back to the campaign, what strategies are working to gather support from the community?
Yeah, so I touched on earlier, so the way I started the campaign was with a petition. So from that petition, I had no budget, started out with no budget, no contact, but I got the little petition going with a hope in my heart. And some people, I touched on where I was at the Witches Revival. I made some contact there, helped me to promote the petition. And within a few weeks, I'd got some budget, but I could do some advertising to let people know that the petition was out there. And I managed to get 30,157 people sign our petition to say that they wanted real justice for witches. Now, I started the petition on the official UK government website. And the reason I did that is if you actually study that site, it will say that any petition launched on any other site, for example, change.org, no matter how many signatures that petition gets, the UK Parliament they're not legally obliged to look at it, do anything or to debate it. So I started it on the official channel. They only give you 6 months to get as many people signed as possible. You need 10,000 people to get a comment from the government. And we smashed that. That was brilliant. Earlier this year, so in March, we had a response from the former government. We just had a change around. And the government agreed with my argument. So they agreed that in 1735, the Witchcraft Acts were repealed because they were unjust, because witchcraft isn't a reality. So that was great. They also acknowledged that people were wrongfully accused under the Witchcraft Act, which is great, but I wasn't happy totally with that wording because it still to me implies that perhaps some people were correctly accused under the Witchcraft Act. So I wasn't totally confident or happy with that. But they ended with, as yet, there are no plans to pardon the falsely accused. Now, that was a great place to start. I was never expected to get so many people involved, and we did. So we've been really fortunate. It just shows how many people there are out there who are really passionate about what we're doing. And we could reach more with more support, more funding. So now we have a new government, and I am now going to be reaching out to them directly to try and get the law passed, as I was discussing earlier, to get them to pardon for the Scottish alleged witches and for the Welsh and English. So that's the next step. And so to help me do that, I've started on my website a survey. Now giving everybody the opportunity who wants to have their say. So let our government know why they want them to pardon British witches. Well, we've had some interesting comments. The reason was, I can tell people why I think witches should be pardoned, so-called witches should be pardoned. But the campaign, I'm aware, it resonates with so many people for so many different reasons. And I'm not going to challenge that what people believe. I'm just happy that it is meaningful to people. But I do find that a lot of people are, let's say, they see the links between the past and the present in terms of the misogyny that still exists in the UK, still exists in the world. I don't know if you know, but our new UK government, the Labour government, they have an initiative to halve violence against women and children within the next 10 years. But should that really be an initiative in 2024? Should our government have to be doing that? Why are we still doing this to our women and girls? What is wrong? There's no disconnect between the misogyny that was behind the witch trials and the misogyny that exists in society today. And a lot of people are seeing that. They're recognizing, the witch trials were a great miscarriage of justice. But they're also seeing that women have been fighting for equality for centuries. and we still don't have it. And we still live in a society where misogyny is deemed acceptable. And it's not. And women have had enough because we are not witches, we're women. On the one hand, you have people who are backing the campaign for that reason. And then we also have people who are backing the campaign because they see that witch trials are not a thing of the past. So it's happening around the world, Africa, India, Papua New Guinea, many countries. Also happening in the USA, and it's also happening in the UK in forms of witch persecution, to where people are being labelled as witches and they are being abused because of that. The trials in one form or another are still happening. And there's many people out there who want to see that come to an end and believe that pardoning or restored witches can help.
Just saw a post yesterday by Dr. Leo Igwe in Nigeria of the advocacy for alleged witches, just stating just that fact that pardoning witches or exonerating persons accused of witchcraft in the UK, what they did in Spain, what we're working on here in the States, that it actually sends a message to the world.
Absolutely, of course it does. I don't see anything negative to come out of pardoning or righting the wrongs that they had. And I don't understand why anyone would think there's no value in doing so. We can achieve so much. I heard an interesting, just like aside, but I heard a really interesting interview a few weeks ago with a former judge and criminal justice lawyer in the UK. And in an interview, he said that it's up, to paraphrase, it's everyone's duty to heal the world in whatever form that may take. And for me, this is what we are doing by, or attempting to do through our pardon and exoneration. Because people say, why does pardoning witches matter now when we're in climate crisis? Well, why is that happening? Because we're responsible. We're to blame. Humanity is to blame because look what we keep doing. We are not taking care of the planet. We're not taking care of each other. We're so busy doing what we used to do 500 years ago, blaming the other, blaming everyone else for our perceived misfortune. And if the planet's going to go forward, if humanity's going to go forward, that's all got to stop. Or we've got to stop, take a look at who we are, how we're living, how we used to live, and really strive to change and be better. And that's part of what the campaign is hoping to achieve and what we can achieve in many ways, in many different ways. The pardon or the exonerations that you're doing just have nothing but positive knock-on effects for people. And for those people out there now who are being labelled as witches, who are living in the witch camp, who cannot go home, who are suffering, who are being abused, what greater symbol of hope can they have than to hear that countries have stood up and said, look, what we are doing, what we did is wrong, and this can't go on anymore. Just think, I'm like with Leo totally on this, that pardoning the people from the past will just have great things to do for our advocates today who are out there working to help the people who are being labelled and persecuted as witches today.
And we met a couple months ago at a global gathering in Lancaster of advocates who are in different phases of ending witch hunts and protecting victims or seeking justice for them. It greatly impacted me. Is there anything from that conference that you'd like to talk about today?
Yeah, one thing that really hit home to me was firstly the people with albinism. Are they suffering at the moment? They are, on the one hand, we have the ritual attacks that are going on. So taking body parts of people with albinism because of bonkers beliefs that doing so, using those in kind of ritual magic can have some positive effect for the practitioner or the person paying the practitioner. And on the other hand, those people are being othered, just like the so-called witches of the past were. So they are being discriminated against. that really has stayed with me, hearing the accounts of those people, the suffering that they're going through now, and the fact that it's not being talked about greatly is gone. And we need to really be doing more. Like you are, your podcaster, I heard the music when you did today, early on. We need to be doing more to get that out there, the messages out there. So that's one thing that really stuck with me. And if I can use my campaign to help people with albinism, I'll do that. Sure. The other thing that struck me was when we were showing some photographs of people being persecuted as witches. Um, really harrowing photographs of people basically being, they know how to say it, but their bodies being used machetes until there was nothing left. Because people think they are responsible for some kind of adversity, whether it's ill health, crop failure, things that the innocent men and women were accused of in Europe 500 years ago. Are still, I know those accusations are still being made now in Africa. And to see that really stayed with me. And I just think, so we saw one image of a group of young men wielding machetes against an innocent old woman. And I just think, to me, it's how can I get the message out there that why do you fear the old woman and not the men wielding the machete? And I think we need to change perception just to get people to think critically about their reasoning, why they are othering people, blaming or using them as scapegoats for any kind of misfortune. And again, if what we're doing through exoneration and pardon can help, people are advocating to see real change in this area. Yeah, I'm all for it, and I'll do everything I can to help promote those people.
I wanted to ask because we've talked about a lot of the reasons why we believe that pardons and exonerations are right and why they should be passed. Uh, are you receiving any feedback counter to that? Are people saying that the accused persons should not be pardoned for any reason? And what reasons are you hearing?
Yeah, I haven't had anything directly come to me, but I have seen some comments on social media. And I think it was in 2022, a member of the Scottish Parliament carried out a consultation asking people whether they wanted pardons to happen for the people prosecuted under the Scottish Witchcraft Act. So I studied that to see what reasons people were giving for wanting it to go ahead. And the reasons were basically some people still believe that some of them wouldn't have been innocent. So that's an educational problem from my perspective. We need to shows you how much education we need to do. Other people just don't think it's relevant because they're dead. We're talking about people who are dead. Well, that depends on your metaphysics, shall we say, whether you believe in an afterlife, anything like that. But also we're just saying, okay, if you do believe, okay, when you're dead, fine. But the ideas that led to the witch trial, that led to the persecution and execution of the innocent people, still very much alive and well, and they are growing. So that's not, in my mind, a reason not to do anything, because, like we've just been talking about, it is an ongoing issue. People tend to think witch trials are a thing of the past, but they're not.
Right on.
Anything else that you would like to be able to speak to for listeners today before we close?
Yeah, I'd just like to take the opportunity to invite people to complete the survey, if that's okay. So they can go into my website and have their say. So just tell politicians why you want them to pardon our historic local witches. And the more data I get, the better, because the stronger argument I can build to present to the policy makers. So yeah, that's one thing I'd like to say. And if anyone has any other ideas of how they'd like to help me, yeah, you can get in touch. That's fine. I have a contact form on my website. I'm happy to have a chat. So yes, I'm looking forward to see what comes of it.
Your website is charlottemeredith.co.uk.
That's it. Yeah. And you can go on just go / the hyphen campaign, and that will link you to Justice for Witching.
Excellent. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. And we'll have links to that in the show notes as well.
Great. Thank
So
you.
people can click right away from the description of the episode. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been really great to talk to you again and hear from you on your wonderful campaign.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everything you're doing to help the so-called witches in your country. And I hope that you go ahead and get the rest of the eggs on Earth.
Great. Thank you. And now Sarah has End Witch Hunts news.
End Witch Hunts news on Maryland and Massachusetts taking historic steps toward witch trial acknowledgement. In a significant development for historical justice, Maryland legislators are considering House Joint Resolution 2, which would exonerate colonial-era victims of witch trials in the state. The resolution highlights two notable cases: Rebecca Fowler, who was executed for alleged witchcraft, and Maud Dyer, a real woman celebrated widely in Maryland folklore, who actually died in exile after facing false accusations. Additionally, Massachusetts legislators will be considering an exoneration for those hanged for alleged witchcraft in colonial Boston with H.D. 3054. These innocent women were Margaret Jones, Elizabeth Kendall, Alice Lake, Ann Hibbins, and Goody Glover. This legislative action comes on the heels of Connecticut's groundbreaking 2023 resolution that acknowledged 33 witch trial victims. The Connecticut measure saw remarkable bipartisan support, passing with a decisive 121-30 House vote and near unanimous Senate approval. These resolutions align with recent United Nations initiatives addressing global witch hunt persecution, positioning the states alongside international efforts to protect vulnerable populations. Maryland delegate Heather Bagnall and Massachusetts Representative Stephen Owens are leading parallel efforts in their states to address colonial witch trial injustices. Maryland's HJ2 and Massachusetts HD 3054 both demonstrate how states can take meaningful action with minimal resources to right historical wrongs. These bills both await General Assembly committee consideration in order to move on for votes in the House. Do you want to support these resolutions? Please sign the petitions. The Massachusetts petition is change.org/witch trials, and the Maryland petition is change.org/MD witch trials. It's not too late to RSVP to our Hartford Witch Trial Remembrance event February 1st at Connecticut's Old State House. Get your reservation in today on eventbrite.com. The link is found in the show notes.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us on Witch Hunt.
Spend time with us again next week.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.